2023 has been a wild year for celebrity memoirs. The reason I know this is because I can say Pamela Anderson and Britney Spears are two of my favorite authors without a shred of irony in my voice. Hell, even Jeanette McCurdy's book finally got my mom to admit that maybe, sometimes, there is a possibility that a parent could be wrong. So I guess I believe in miracles now. But here's the thing. Britney Spears' memoir has highlighted a lot about how we can tear down pop culture figures in order to uphold this idea of societal purity. It's very good and you should read it. But the larger pattern with celebrity memoirs that I'm noticing is that every single celebrity memoir written by a man is awful. And the reason I think a lot of these men can't stick the landing when it comes to relating to their audience is because of their ego and their struggles with understanding their own masculinity. So let's get into it. What's really beautiful about The Woman in Me is that Britney Spears manages to tell a story that is exceedingly personal. She states her actions as she believed they happened and doesn't try to emotionally justify herself. Whether it's admitting that she had a poor performance at the VMAs in 2007, or if it's regarding her resentment towards her mother and father in her adolescence. My dad could also be abusive with my mom. What made his time at home especially bad was that my mom would argue with him all night long. He was so drunk he couldn't even talk. I don't even know if he could hear her. I would go back to bed furious, staring daggers at the ceiling, listening to her yell, cursing her in my heart. Isn't that awful? He was the one who was drunk. He was the one passed out in the chair, but she was the one who ended up pissing me off the most, because at least in those moments, I was so desperate for sleep, and she wouldn't shut up. What I think is very unique about this is that she doesn't try to justify herself with logic. She doesn't ask for sympathy. She acknowledges the flaw and lets the reader decide if she was justified in context. I think it shows this incredible amount of respect for the audience and a conviction in knowing what you feel in that moment. Now let's compare that to Matthew Perry. On page 70, I've spent my life being attracted to unavailable women. It doesn't take a psychology degree to figure out that this had something to do with my relationship with my mother. I vividly remember being at some fancy ballroom when I was about 6 years old, and when my mom came in, every head in the room turned. I wanted her to turn and look at me in those moments. That's why I slept with so many women. I was trying to recreate my childhood and win. That is some heavy resentment. Now, in regards to his mom, earlier in the book, he does say this: "I'm not blaming her for working. Someone had to bring home the bacon. I just meant I spent a great deal of time alone." And it's good that he says that. Understanding where your trauma is from is extremely necessary. But just labeling something doesn't absolve you of your actions. And there are no further examples in this book of him having a healthy and respectful relationship with a woman. And later, when he's describing rehab, he writes, "I've been in therapy since I was 18 years old, and honestly, by this point, I didn't need any more therapy." It doesn't sound like that's true. Now, I don't think anyone needs to be a master of their own universe in order to write a memoir, but I do think the author should try to have a few less inconsistencies. Now, here's the thing. I have been extra harsh on this man, and I do actually think that everyone should read this, just not for the reasons it was written. So we're gonna put a pin in this and get back to it later. I find it so interesting that these men who play the position of leading man, men who are in a position of leadership on camera, will carry that same idea of themselves in everyday life. But then, when it's time to sit down and relate to the audience that you're trying to appeal to, it comes off as incredibly condescending. And there's a big difference between having confidence in who you are and your beliefs and being arrogant. And no one rides that arrogant train harder than John motherfucking Stamos. This book is truly terrible. Every single interesting thing that has ever happened to this man is pushed aside in this book so we can talk instead about banging celebrities. But that's okay, because where Mr. Stamos here drops the proverbial memoir ball, my girl Pamela here is able to pick that ball up and sprint to the goal? I don't know, man. Listen, I read celebrity memoirs for fun. If it's not obvious by now, I don't know sports. I don't really know how to help you. So I actually think these two celebrities have a lot in common. Both are magnetic in their features, both were known as playboys, literally and figuratively, and both have a history of being seen as a hot piece of meat to the public. But the way these two look back on how the public sees them is night and day. Page 46 in Pamela Anderson's memoir. As I matured, I noticed a lot of my boyfriends were bad and progressively got worse. Was I doing something wrong? Did I make them crazy? They would turn violent, mean, cruel so quickly. I felt I did everything to try to get them to love me by being accommodating, generous, or just by being the comedian. Laughter always being an easy way for me to cut the tension. And of course, Pamela Anderson is very public about the way she used her body to create her brand. The downside of that, though, is the ravenous public that you have to face once they believe that what you have presented in front of them is theirs to own. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like John Stamos dealt with similar hardships to Pamela Anderson, but there are genuine accounts of sexual harassment in this book that are just glazed over. John Stamos created a brand around the Playboy image and was often used for his body. But when it's time to recount how he feels about it, I can't go on my friend Howard Stern's show without him salivating over the girls he thinks I've slept with. I play into it 100%. It's flattering. I feel it's my solemn duty to uphold my status as that guy, keeping the dream alive for those average Joes out there, giving them someone to live vicariously through. Who cares if it's at the expense of my own happiness? There's a question mark at the end of that line. I'm sorry, is there a shortage of Playboy men who run around not giving a shit about bitches? The crazy thing here is that John Stamos could absolutely hold a conversation about how the Playboy facade is just a performance. It doesn't lead to anything because it's an act. But instead, he spends this entire memoir talking about how many ladies he's banged and complaining about how the kids on Full House got bigger laughs than him. By the way, guys, did you know that Alec Baldwin and John Stamos are the same person? It's true. They both had an incredibly easy road to success in acting. They both could charm their way into any room, and both of them have dedicated sections in their memoir to a nemesis who actually did nothing to them. John Stamos resents the Olsen twins so much that there are entire pages in this book dedicated to him talking about how he tried to get them fired. And Alec hates Harrison Ford so much because Harrison was cast in a role that Alec wanted 30 years ago. On page 129, Ford is one of the most successful stars in movie history. He has abundant fame, wealth, and the adulation of an adoring public and everyone in the town. One thing he does not have is an Oscar, which must frustrate, if not burden him. Ford's lack of any serious accolades for his acting is somewhat odd. He clearly has had every advantage. He's worked with the best directors, and yet Ford is, Oscar-wise, empty-handed. And the most insane part of all of this is that Alec Baldwin also doesn't have an Oscar. It's like, I get it though. I bet when these men were writing about loud babies and Harrison Ford, they were trying to be cheeky. But I don't think they realize how weird they sound and how it comes off as just mean and bitter. Now compare that to Mariah Carey, someone who has some real nemesis in this world, but she states her side, she claims what she was going through in the moment, and then she moves on. And I'm not gonna lie, I love a mess. I'm not gonna be upset when a celebrity tries to reignite the flames of a long dead rivalry, but I also would like the celebrity to pick a half decent target. I don't really think it's productive to fight with drooling babies or men that are so old they might as well be drooling babies. But yeah, comment below on who you think John Stamos should fight with. Personally, I want him to fight with Mario Lopez, and they can just stand in front of each other and have a dimple off. I can't help but think that the men that are writing these memoirs are shrouded by their own ego. And when left to their own devices, they tend to show off how little they actually understand about the world. And maybe that's on purpose. Maybe these men are not trying to write a relatable book, and that's fine. But the consequence of being cringe in your memoir means that people aren't going to listen. And if you have a point to make, you don't want to undermine your own point by not knowing how to make a point. And clearly, the girls who get it, even when a man's career is on the line. Their books don't have enough depth to be taken seriously. A perfect example is when Prince Harry is talking about his time at war. I'd been in combat before, I've killed before, but this was my most direct contact with the enemy. I asked myself how I felt. Traumatized? No. Sad? No. Surprised? No. It was really just simple maths. These are bad people doing bad things to our guys, doing bad things to the world. If this guy I just removed from the battlefield hadn't killed British soldiers, he would soon. Taking him meant fewer young men and women wrapped like mummies. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I am an expert on geopolitical strategy, but one thing I can comment on is the absolute infuriating nature of royalty claiming that war is simple maths, because it's actually not. It's incredibly fucking ironic. The single person who possibly could have done anything to prevent exactly what they were doing in that battlefield is the person saying that he had no choice but to do it. This book is exceedingly critical of the royal family, but has nothing to say about the institutions around them. It's not Pamela Anderson speaking out against animal cruelty It's not Heather Gay talking about Mormons. This bitch, more than any other influencer on the planet, can change things from the inside. But instead, it's simple maths. What's interesting here is that Harry claims to be going against the institutions, yet he still holds an immense amount of trust for the institution. And I think a lot of that has to do with his idea of masculinity. Trusting institutions to protect you is a luxury that women, people of color, and other marginalized folks don't always have. Should African Americans trust police officers when so many are responsible for killing innocent and unarmed members of their community? When the world is not an equal level playing field, neither is our relation to risk. Now, I'm inevitably going to side with anyone who wants to disrupt the establishment of the monarchy. It is real hard to listen to a voice that participates in so much that they claim they are running away from. And the cringe keeps rolling on with Jason Derulo. And hold on to your hats, because this is him talking about dieting. Oof. Being in good physical shape isn't just about looking good, although I won't lie, looking good never hurt anybody. I remind myself that there's no meal that tastes as good as having a six-pack feels. I always work out, always. 5 times a week at least. This is just maintenance for me. I feel as if I look pretty average when I don't keep it to this level. My body doesn't get to an extraordinary place unless I'm doing at least 2 workouts a day, 1 cardio and 1 lift. This isn't scientific, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I look like this. And I think that what he just said is crazy. I'm gonna go ahead and ignore the 2014 anorexic Reddit post that was, "There's no meal that tastes as good as having a six-pack feels," and instead focus on the other mountain of garbage. What he's describing is the opposite of balance and consistency. And if a woman wrote this, we all know the exact situation that would result. The one good thing about this is that he wrote it in a book, which is kind of great because it's Jason Derulo, and no one in their right mind is going to read a book from that man. Now, I've been clowning on these men for this entire video, and I do think a lot of said clowning is deserved. But unfortunately, there is a more serious consequence to not being able to communicate. And this is where we come back to Matthew Perry. There are 2 voices in this book fighting for attention. One is a genuinely passionate tale of someone's struggle with addiction. It's tragic, sometimes hard to read, but it's raw and real. But the other voice is constantly trying to put the blame on something else. Some of that blame is deserved. For instance, there are rehab facilities in this book that are not doing their due diligence to take care of their patrons. But there's other parts of this book where he talks about resenting Jennifer Aniston for not wanting him sexually, and he never gets over it, which is a weird relationship to have for someone you worked with for 10 years. The reason I like this book, however, and the reason Matthew Perry is a fantastic example of why community is so important, is because in between the lines of what he's saying, you can tell it's the story of a man who's never felt like he belongs anywhere. Throughout the book, Matthew Perry seems to become less curious about life and more ashamed of what he thinks he's become. Shame is not just a feeling, it's a barrier to functioning. It doesn't just make you feel bad, it makes you dysfunctional. These days, we know that addiction is less about you as a person and more about the community that's been built around you. And this book is a catalog about someone who has never found their community. And the irony of all of this happening while they're on the most popular show called Friends. I don't know if I would have recognized this pattern if I hadn't read Julia Fox's memoir in such quick succession. Realistically, these are very similar stories. One where someone finds a community and one who doesn't. But I think the best lesson can be taken from using these 2 books together. From Julia Fox, the woman who woke up on the bathroom floor was almost 50 before she got sober. This gives me hope for some reason. Combined with words from Matthew Perry. So there is light in the darkness. There is. You just have to look hard enough for it. Now, don't get it twisted. I am not saying that these men should have written better books for me. I would actually love Alec Baldwin to write me another memoir equally as low quality as the one he's already written. What I am saying is that ego and the performance of masculinity seems to hold men back from truly understanding themselves. And also, Jason Derulo sucks ass.